definitely creating content that helps people is really the solution.
What really works is building a community, consistently doing events like webinars, and producing content specifically for certain categories.
You earn that raise and you earn that job.
Welcome to Future Fuzz, the digital marketing podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Future Fuzz, the digital marketing podcast. Today I'm joined by Julian Walker, the dynamic group managing partner at Instinctif Partners, a firm at the forefront of insight-led communications. With a passion for unlocking potential, Julian's leadership fuels transformation, not just within his incredibly talented teams at Instinctif and Truth Consulting, but across the clients and brands they serve. His work is defined by a strategic blend of external communications, social engagement, and leadership that drives meaningful, sustainable impact. Beyond the boardroom, Julian is an adventurer at heart, having navigated jungles, deserts, and remote seas, sometimes with unintended detours. In addition to his communications activities, Julian is a writer, has written several books on travel and humour, and chairs a fund designed to empower and develop young people's true potential. Julian, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me, Justin. That was a great introduction. I recognise myself vaguely in there.
Fantastic. Well, for a PR man, I've got to get it absolutely right, don't I?
I don't know. I'm not too worried about what people say about me. It's more what they say about my clients, I have to say.
Wonderful stuff. So please, Julian, tell us about Instinctif Partners and the kind of work that you do there.
Well, we focus predominantly on financial and corporate positioning of companies, looking after brand reputation. But we do everything from investor communications to corporate positioning, product launches, public affairs as well, or public policy as I think it's now called, to try and give it more respectability. And we're slightly different in the fact that we also provide for design and content elements. So we have a big digital branch. We do report and accounts and the design of those, corporate videos. And then we also have a marketing insights business called Truth, which provides all sorts of insights for all sorts of different brands, which is great.
And how many people work in the organisation?
There's a little over 200 at the moment.
Okay, and how long has the company been established for?
Ages and ages. I've literally been there a year, and I'm delighted to be there. But it's been around since the late 1980s, I think. So sort of fits
to that. So
nearly 40 years, yeah, which is quite a long time. It's been through one iteration. It had a different name originally. And it was mainly known as an investor communications business called College Hill. But it's been Instinctif for probably just over a decade now.
Fantastic. Well, your background is in the agency world, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, a bit of both, actually. Yeah. So I've sort of, the last 15 years before I joined here, I was in-house doing corporate affairs, bluffing my way through every type of communication. And before that, I had my own business and I ran a couple of large agencies as well. So, yeah. And in fact, I originally started out as an insurance broker in Lloyd's in the very, very distant past.
And how did you get into the agency world initially with the company that you found? Scope?
Well, no, not the company I founded. It was later on. I got into communications. I was selling sandwiches, having left the insurance world to drive a fire engine halfway around the world for charity. And I came back and I was selling sandwiches in big baskets around trading floors, as you do, obviously. And someone said, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, "Well, advertising or PR." I didn't really know what PR was. They always said them together. And he said, "Oh, I know someone in PR." And I finished my rounds around this trading floor and he said, "Oh, come over here. Here's the name of the guy that you need to write to. Don't write to the personnel department," which is what HR was called in those days. He said, "Write to the chairman and tell him you've driven a fire engine. He'll like that." And purely by chance, they happened to be shipping one of the guys off to Hong Kong. And so they had a space in London and he went around and mistakenly told everyone he was hiring a fireman. So I don't think he really read my letter properly, but anyway, it was, I got in and I managed to stay one step ahead of being found out ever since.
And and then how long did you stay in that bit?
I was there for about 5 years, 4.5 years, something like that. And then I was approached by a more niche financial communications business. And I was there for a bit before I was approached by a bank to go in-house. And I went there, and then we got taken over, and I went back into consultancy, which is quite unusual from a switch. And then I had a couple of agency jobs running agencies then, and then set my own business up, which I sold to another agency, as you do. These sort of things cannibalize each other. And then went in-house and spent 15 years predominantly living out of a suitcase. I was sort of traveling on flights because they were all global roles, pretty much every other week, going somewhere else. And then COVID really did for the business that I was in, which was in travel at the time. Right. And we were managing corporate travel, and it was a very different world post-COVID, and we struggled along. And in fact, they're being bought out at the moment by a competitor. But I left them and was kicking my heels for a bit before I was approached to come and see whether I could have some fun here.
What were your favourite parts about those days, and what were your least favourite parts about those days?
Well, the bit about travelling, you mean? The favourite bits about travelling?
Yeah. Well, those hazy days where you lived out of a suit.
I think the most interesting thing is always making time to see where you are. Otherwise, it's very easy to go, yeah, I've just been to some glorious country. And they go, what did you see? And you say, well, a taxi and an office and a hotel, you know. So I always used to try and make time to have a walk around, which did scare people a bit because some of the countries we went to, perhaps not ideal to be strolling around. And then, in fact, in America once, I was walking along. I woke up ridiculously early doing a phone call back to the UK. I thought I would do that. So I was walking along the street and I was aware of something behind me. And I sort of thought, well, it seems a pretty pleasant area. I'm sure it's not a mugger. And I turned around and these blue flashing lights and a siren went off. And the police told me I wasn't allowed to walk there. And what was I doing there at 4 o'clock in the morning? I've got jet lag and I'm on a call.
Sounds like classic America. It's not the first time I've heard a story like that, actually. One of my friends, exactly the same story. You're not allowed to walk on the side of the...
But it's bizarre. But they have sidewalks to be in. They're not for walking on, apparently.
No, absolutely not. No, indeed. Then the starting of a business. So what was your bugbear there?
Having run a big agency, I saw an opportunity to do a more niche proposition, which was effectively outsourcing the heads of corporate affairs or the corporate affairs role for mid-sized companies. And I had a colleague who saw a similar opportunity. We were like-minded, so we both resigned and set the business up and had I think we were together for about 4 years before we sold it. And it was great. It was a really nice little business. We ended up with about 5 people there. So very small, but, pleasantly profitable and doing a great job. And we had some great clients who were very trusting and liked what we did. So it was sort of one of those serendipitous moments, and it worked. So it was great.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then moving on to now, so where you've been in Instinctif for a year, and you've got obviously a lot of topics on your plate running the business. What do you feel is really important for your clients at the moment?
I think cutting through a lot of the flim-flam that goes around communications. So there's a lot of talk about AI solving for this or technology solving for that, and actually reminding people that the best way to communicate is to think about your audience first of all. What do they want to hear? And match that with what you want to say, and somewhere in the middle is the right thing to do. And I think that's good. What we've seen over the last few years, and we can probably talk about this later if it's of interest, is a sort of knee-jerk reaction to follow trends and ideas. And I liken it more to watching sort of, 5 or 6 year olds playing football or soccer, as some people might call it, and you have 11 people on each side, and yet all 22 are chasing the ball from one side of the pitch to the other, including the goalkeepers, and it's a little bit like that sometimes. So I think someone goes, hey, we've all got to be on TikTok, and I goes, yes, we've all got to be on TikTok, and someone goes, actually there's no point because none of our customers are on TikTok, so we all need to be somewhere else. So, hey. So it's sort of knowing where your audience is and understanding how to reach them, I think is the key. And I've always found that, it sounds really obvious, and it is very obvious, I suppose, but it's the basic truism of communications. And it doesn't matter what age we're going to be in or what technological support we have. I think that will always overpower any urge to rush to the latest fad.
Do you think that there are a lot of people running after the AI football then at the moment?
I think there are, actually, and rather depressingly, I think there's a lot of agencies that might be thinking this is the the panacea for overheads. So, they could the cure all. But because obviously it is very easy to do communications. You don't need a great deal of kit. You've basically a phone and a laptop, and in fact, you less need the phone, really. So it's more of a laptop or a pad, a tablet of some sort. But I think people very quickly forget that you really need to ensure that the levels of a company's sort of implementation of its digital presence and its data management. So you might suddenly think, hey, we're going to use this recording tool, this AI recording tool, without actually thinking, I wonder where the data is stored. Is that GDPR compliant? And it may be GDPR compliant, but is it compliant for my client's needs? And therefore, actually, you need to be thinking about what is that and how does it impact them? And also, your cybersecurity, is it good enough to be able to keep trying these new apps and whatever? And I mean, I'm not suggesting they're not safe, but different clients require different security levels. And I think good agencies will be aiming to be the best possible security they can have. And then they overlay that with human experience, which I don't think those three things I think work symbiotically together. So rather than chasing a fad or leaping into AI, if you match those three up with your client's requirements and your client's needs, you'll be better positioned to be able to give them the right kind of service.
Do you feel that in a way, because there's a lot of hype surrounding it, there's also, and you mentioned there that lots of companies are thinking, right, we can reduce our overheads here, we can try and automate the hell out of everything, but it's also having an impact on creativity as well?
I think they're sort of two different sides of the same coin, really. So I think the rush to automate perceived lower value jobs actually has a longer term impact on businesses. So for example, if you use technology to do some of the lower jobs that you have, you're not actually progressing your staff or giving them the chance to be what they should be. So I'll come back to the second bit in a minute, but I think I've always seen my role as to help people achieve their true potential. And I know that sounds a bit like Ted Lasso, the TV manager. I don't know if you've ever seen Ted Lasso. He says he wants to help people be the best possible versions of themselves they can be. But I think achieving their true potential is the same for what I want to do for my clients.
Right.
And you can't really do that if you don't have a proposition that's helping people develop and grow their skills. And that's an interesting adjunct to people not coming into offices now. They don't get a chance to hear different ways of dealing with a similar problem and pick, the bits that they might want and turn their own persona into it. I was told years ago, and I've obviously used this quite a bit because it's quite a long, boring quote, but it's actually very proper in terms of its intent, which is there's rarely a right or a wrong answer in communications. It's the one you can best justify with your own experience. And it is really true from that point of view.
Do you feel, though, then with the working world, that as we work more remotely, that it causes creative challenges and causes, bringing forward new ideas to be quite difficult to do? Or do you even think then actually that companies need to get back together more in person? I mean, it's a really big debate, right? Because corporates are bringing people back in, and corporates are losing talent.
Yeah,
because of it. Yeah,
I don't think the concept of working from home is stifling creativity. What I think you miss is that ability to spark. So I used to talk about creativity at colleges for a bit and said the most important thing to me is having that sort of 5 seconds of bravery to come up with your idea in a meeting and say it. And it might be the most ludicrous concept that anyone's ever heard, but and everyone might recognize it as being completely useless. However, it might inspire someone else to go, well, hold on, if you took a bit of that and you did this with it, and then someone else at the table goes, well, hold on, if you took that and then you did this and you amplified it with a bit of that, and you suddenly then get a collegiate sort of creative support from an idea that may have come completely out of left field and wasn't appropriate in the first place. But I think you do miss that a bit on screen because people are less likely to want to air that in a screen where everyone is staring at you. At least around a table, some people will have their side to you, so they won't be able to turn around and stare. And you can have your 5 seconds of bravery. But I think the creative element as well that technology brings, and that was back to the point that we were talking about a little bit earlier, that I avoided answering, so I'm prepared to go on the record now, is I think it's things like AI are really helpful for creativity. There's no doubt about it. It's really changing the way that you can, and the speed with which you can create and generate content. I think what's more interesting is anybody can do it. So that first prompt that you give your AI tool is not really that intelligent, and maybe the second one isn't that intelligent either one. What's really interesting is the fifth or sixth one, because you as an individual have to know what it is you're trying to get out. And so instead of just producing a whole lot of stuff and going, da-da, there it is that sort of fifth or sixth or even seventh prompt that really narrows it down and turns it into something that's very good. And there was a cartoon, which you may have seen or may not have seen, and it's two pictures which are identical. There's a picture of someone sitting in front of a computer looking up to a person standing over their shoulder. And in the first picture it says, gosh, this AI tool's really great. It can turn one bullet point into a 10,000 word thesis. And the next picture is the same thing. And the person's saying, this AI tool is great. It can turn a 10,000 word thesis into a bullet point.
What into a bullet point?
And it is that sort of point there. And I think that's quite exciting in terms of what you can do with it. But I think it's important not to rely or overly rely on that as your your muse, as it were, your creative muse.
Future Fuzz is sponsored by SalesSource, B2B pipeline management and sales growth for your business.
We've previously discovered in other podcasts that, the opportunities for mistakes that are made are quite huge, and also hallucinations as well. I mean, we did a company quiz where we all work remotely, so a lot of the team are in places like we've got Ukraine, Kosovo, South Africa, and so we're very global, right? And in our office in Amsterdam, we did an online quiz as a team, which I called it a bit of a pub quiz. And I said to ChatGPT, mainly some questions, general knowledge, which rugby team has won the most World Cups? And ChatGPT said New Zealand. When to our South African colleagues, they were highly offended by that, but that is not true. It is the Springboks that won the most. Yeah. But there you go. So that's a hallucination, right? That's where it's got it absolutely wrong. So there you go. You've got to be very careful when using these tools.
But also you need to be, I'm not suggesting that you weren't 100% precise in your prompt, but the second prompt might have been, can you check that I'm talking only about male World Cups, or I'm talking about female and male World Cups, or I'm also talking about all of
in a day. Yeah,
could have been
all of them ever.
Yeah.
Because there could have been a World Cup that only had 3 teams in it in 1910.
Yeah.
And it was New Zealand against Scotland, and England and New Zealand won.
Well, like that bit of trivia about who is the Olympic champion at rugby. Do you know who the Olympic champions are at rugby? We'll have to check this on AI later.
Rugby 7.
No, rugby, the 15 aside.
Olympic champions at rugby union?
Yeah.
I didn't know rugby union was in the Olympics.
It hasn't been for years. This is why the winner was I think it was once or twice. Yeah. But the answer is the USA, which is really bonkers. And now everyone listening to this is going to get on going, no, that's rubbish. But at least we'll engage. And that, in fact, funny enough, that is one of the best things about marketing today, is the shift that we've seen going from broadcast, which is how it always used to be. You just, there's my message, to actually wanting to engage. So by having given out a fact like that, I'm sure there'll be hundreds of people going, that's complete rubbish. That's not true. But we can then engage in a dialogue and we have a chat, as long as they're not all insulting me for my cretinous bit of comments. But that's a really interesting shift, actually, in the way that marketing and communications is happening, because it did very much used to be that one-way traffic, and
very one-way,
and the proliferation of different devices and channels, and also the speed with which it happens so suddenly now is very different. When I started out in financial PR, companies would make their announcement on the stock exchange in London. Yeah, we would have the press release, the hard copy of the press release in envelopes, and the motorbike couriers would come and they would pick up all the press releases for one of the postcodes where the newspapers were, and they would take that, another one would take theirs off and drop them off. And that's how we communicated, because email wasn't around. And you can't really imagine the concept of something so pedestrian, or not pedestrian, but two-wheeled, as we should probably say, as being the method that you got your communications to the journalist. And then you'd ring them and you'd have to check, did you actually get my press release? Because they might be stuck in the post room or something. And it's just a whole different world. Whereas now if you read saying, did you get my email? It's a bit like when I get harassed on LinkedIn saying, this is your final chance to respond. It's like, well, I haven't responded to 4 of your messages. I'm obviously not interested. I'm not ghosting you. I'm just not interested. No, I didn't request the approach, and I'm not interested now.
let's talk about that in terms of investor communication. So, and corporate communication. So specifically investors. So how are companies that you work with adapting to the way that digital communication has now changed?
Primarily for that point I was making earlier about the proliferation of channels, you need to look at what your investor base is and which is the best channel to reach them. Now, most of the investor sites take a feed from the stock exchange, so they will take, and whichever it is, and it doesn't have to be London Stock Exchange. There's private match bargain exchanges where you can trade shares privately, and there are obviously international exchanges as well. So depending on what you've got, you'll pick the channel that gives you the most information about either the investment that you have or the sector that you're in. And you then need to check that they are running the right distillation of whatever communication it is. Normally done by people, actually, to be honest, but probably increasingly so by bots, just taking the main story and changing it. And I think Bloomberg has been using or was trialing bots years ago to do the headlines for results, because the basic layout of the results were always the same. So therefore, it's a relatively simple program. Obviously, other newswires were doing the same. I should promote one over another, I guess. Getting very much into the BBC concern there, but I think the basic rule of thumb is still the same, which is know your audience, know where they're going to be, and know how you communicate with them. So if you have no real private investors in your thing, or retail investors as they're called, you only have institutions, there is no point in trying to target sites or bases where retail investors exist, because there's of no point. It's just a wasted energy for you, and also wasted energy for your client. You need to focus on how are you doing and how are you getting the message across. But we still do analyst presentations in the morning of results, so that the analysts get a chance to they've already made a decision first thing, and they put out their recommendation to the sales teams at 7:05 or whatever in the morning, and then they come along, meet the company, see the whites of their eyes. And they either do that online, which is an increasing trend, especially since COVID, but people still like to come to an office and see a physical presentation, because you get a chance to read body language and you do stuff that you wouldn't necessarily see online. If you're reading,
you probably also get a chance to ask the best questions.
Well, you do, and
it's when you're in the room you can do
exactly, and it's a lot less hostile. It might still be an aggressive question, but it's not seemed so, because you're actually in a crowd of people, and there's a sort of a buffer there as well. But the concept of communicating on screen is a very curious environment. I mean, we're staring at, well, you may not be staring at me at the moment. I'm staring straight at your face, and quite often in a meeting, you won't stare that intently at somebody's face. And also when if you've got a sort of team of people and you've got sort of 40 people in a meeting, you can't really raise your eyebrows when someone mentions the same old chestnut that they always bring up. Oh God, here we go, because everyone can see you. So it's a much more steady in the room. But the principles are still the same as they've always been, which is actually knowing your audience first of all, making sure your messages support your investment proposition. This is for an investment communications, and actually using the channels that best get that across as quickly as possible. And then,
Julian, I want to ask you on that point now. So you're dealing with a lot of companies that are very well established, and they obviously have, I would imagine, fairly strong cultures and guidelines, and they have to be very careful about what they say. How are clients reacting at the moment to market forces? How confident are they feeling? What's the feedback you're getting regarding any of that? And what's your feedback as someone who's running an agency right now?
That's a number of loaded questions in one, so well done. That's
my fault.
It's absolutely perfect, isn't it? That's really good. So let me sort of take it in a slightly different way without avoiding the question. The share price will do what the share price will do, and I think that's all it has to. A public company management team have to accept that the market will decide. That's it. So they might put out news, which is great, and for whatever reason it is, and normally the answer is there's more sellers than buyers, the price may go down on a piece of good news, or it may go up on something that's perceived to be bad news because someone's waiting in the rings for whatever to build up a stock in that business. But I think,
do you not then have to convince them that? Do they have something in mind when they go, we're going to release good news and the share price is going to go up? Is that a foregone conclusion in their minds, or are they more open-minded?
I think now people are much more used to the concept of actually what the stock exchange rules say. So there's rules around and regulated requirements around the release of information and the timescale with which you have to do it. So there is a pragmatic approach to that. But ultimately, what it boils down to, and we used to do a piece of research for, I don't know, probably did it for about 20 years. And when I say we, I joined it for a short period in one of the companies I was in. But investors invest in for multiple reasons, but the most consistent thing that they invest in is management in control of its destiny. That was a sort of top 5 requirement every single time. And so I think...
So what you're seeing at the moment with Tesla at the time of recording is the management not controlling the destiny of the company?
Well, I could be very diplomatic and say I wouldn't like to comment on any particular incident, but I would say when you get the cult of personality overshadowing a business, it's very difficult to divorce the two. And therefore... perhaps
it's not the first
a natural reaction to someone, which may be an adverse reaction to an individual, then reflects in their business, which actually has nothing to do with them or what they've actually just done to give you that adverse reaction. So I think the cult of personality is very difficult. And I think one of the things that I do like now about publicly quoted companies, certainly in the UK, is there is a lot less of that desire for the chief exec or the chairman to go, look at me, aren't I amazing? And there's much more of realization to say, this is a team effort, guys. We're all in this together. And therefore, occasionally, you will need to have a profile of the leader of that business. But realistically, the way that the business communicates is as a unit rather than an individual, which I think is a refreshing change from how it used to be.
That is definitely a refreshing change. And I think the UK market will hopefully lead the way in not being such brash businesses. Are you optimistic about the UK market going forward?
I think I am, actually, yes. I think we're going to see some change. And I think we're seeing a lot of immediate fallout from attitudes over the pond, shall we say, and different ways of doing business and running economies, but I think change is the ever-present in everything that we do. So I think to blame things on that, yes, there is a cause and effect for some elements, but I think London has a very good financial proposition still, and I think the stock market there is very interesting. I think there's maybe not enough international money investing in London, which is part of the problem. I think a lot of it's gone over to the US and other markets as well. And I think one of the shames about that is people assume that then if they were to delist from London and list in the US, say, they would get a much better valuation of their business. And I think if you look at the companies that have done that, very, very few have actually resulted in an increased market capitalization for a longer term. There's a short spike or whatever, because they're new and exciting and it's the new one on the blocks. But I think London itself has a very good role to play. It's also perfect from a time zone because it's the middle time zone. So everything, you get a bit of everyone during your trading hours, and therefore it does make more sense to be there. So I feel optimistic about it, but I'd also think that optimism is tinged with the fact that there will be change and we will see a number of different ways of investing in this particular instance in the UK. But I do think, and I don't want to turn this into a political diatribe, because I think I used to say that I didn't tell political jokes because they tended to get elected. But the point really is the government, or is any government, actually investing for the future or investing for themselves to get a return on their election promise? And I think if you have a government that is investing for the future of the economy and treating it like a business proposition. So, for example, there's no doubt about it, in the UK, we need a bigger housing stock. And I think whilst it's a difficult concept, that's a really interesting and committed cause to say this is going to underpin growth in the economy. And I think that's probably right.
Yeah, stability is key. And I think what we're seeing now is an uplift for that. At the time of recording, everybody's trying to basically keep the boat steady. Yeah. But it is important, and it has a massive impact on agencies as well, because agencies have in many sectors been struggling and not seeing the growth that they've seen in previous years. And I think maybe a little bit of a hangover from the COVID days. But I think it's crucially important to have that stability, and then once that stability is there, then the investment will come back in. Because if investors hate uncertainty, don't they? Let's be honest with you.
They do.
If they see any sense of doubt, any sense of doubt, and they're out. Julian, as we wrap up, let's talk about your books. You've authored a couple of books. Tell us about those.
Well, the nice thing about my books is they're not bestsellers, so no one will have heard of them. But
what do you mean they're not an Amazon bestseller?
well, no, they're not. I think I'm probably about number 950,000 in each topic area. But
well, that was a little bit of a poke at all those people that say that they're an Amazon bestseller. I mean, that's not very hard.
well, it's not. In fact, there is a really good book out. We'll talk about that later, actually, because I won't do an advert for someone else's work at the moment. But it is a great read. The interesting thing about that is I felt compelled to write the travel books for different reasons, but I thought one was an interesting story because it was about traveling around the world in a slightly unusual way. And I wrote a book about travel tips because one of the things that people constantly asking me in the travel world was, well, how do I do that? And how do you get this? And what about this? And how do we prepare for it? So it seemed like a logical thing to do. And the humour book that I wrote was really, I have a massively retentive memory for terrible jokes, sort of dad jokes. And I think I was encouraged to do it with the view that once I'd expunged myself on paper, I wouldn't keep telling them. Unfortunately, that didn't work.
I'm sure that would be a really handy book to have in the toilet downstairs.
I think that's where most copies are kept, actually, yeah. I'm not sure they're library editions, sort of prize of place on a shelf, but yeah. But I think, it's fun. And someone actually was telling me the other day, not to sort of bring it back to AI or anything like that, but there's a lot of posts that you get on social media where someone has written a really long post, in depth about something. And I wonder sometimes whether they've missed the boat about using AI intelligently. If I had 20 minutes to read somebody's blog post, I'd probably prefer to read a book rather than that, because it's probably not written by them. It might be assisted with an AI prompt here and there, especially if you know the person and you realize it doesn't sound like the way they speak.
And you can often pick these things out when those, especially LinkedIn posts, end with a question mark.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a dead giveaway. Too many emojis.
Yeah.
And, let's be honest, I mean, people can pick them out more and more, and we don't want to read any more tripe. Like you say, you'd much rather read a book than read a 20-minute post
absolutely.
On someone's page.
Absolutely. What I do like about AI, though, is somebody said to me the other day, the thing you know about AI is the AI you have today is the worst it's ever going to be. And I thought, I quite like that as a line.
Excellent. On that note, Julian Walker, thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in and making the choice to listen to this podcast. If you liked what you've heard today, please don't forget to subscribe.